The morning sun cast a golden glow through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as 10-year-old Prince George sat at his breakfast table, completely unaware that his life was about to change in ways he never imagined. Catherine, Princess of Wales, watched her eldest son carefully spread marmalade on his toast, and for the 100th time that week, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The resemblance was becoming impossible to ignore. George had always been a beautiful child, but lately, something extraordinary was happening. His features were maturing in a way that mirrored Catherine's own face with startling precision. The same high cheekbones that had made Catherine one of the most photographed women in the world were emerging on her son's face. His eyes, once simply described as blue, now held the exact shade of cornflower that had captivated millions when Catherine first appeared on the royal scene. "Mummy, why do you keep staring at me?" George asked, looking up from his breakfast with those increasingly familiar eyes. His voice carried the same gentle cadence that Catherine's had possessed even as a child, something her mother Carol had mentioned just the week before during their family visit. Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. Even the way he tilted his head when asking a question was identical to her own mannerism, something she hadn't realized she did until she saw it reflected in her son. "I'm not staring, darling," she replied softly, reaching across to smooth down a wayward lock of his hair that fell in exactly the same pattern as hers had at his age. "I'm just admiring how handsome my boy is growing up to be." The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been gradual, so subtle that even William hadn't noticed at first. But Catherine, with a mother's keen eye, had been watching it unfold like a slow-motion miracle. Each morning brought new evidence of the genetic lottery that seemed to have favored her side of the family tree in ways that defied statistical probability. It had started with his smile. George had always been a cheerful child, but around his 10th birthday, his grin began to carry the same warmth and authenticity that had made Catherine an instant favorite with the public. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the slight dimple that appeared on his left cheek, even the way his whole face seemed to light up from within. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected her own childhood. The resemblance extended far beyond mere physical features. George had developed Catherine's love for photography, often borrowing her camera to capture moments around their home. His artistic eye was remarkably similar to hers, finding beauty in the same simple, natural moments that Catherine had always been drawn to. When she watched him carefully framing a shot of Charlotte playing in the garden, or patiently waiting for the perfect light to photograph Lewis building a fort, she saw herself at that age with startling clarity. Mrs. Henderson, George's art teacher at Lambert School, had recently commented on his unusual talent for capturing emotion in his drawings. "He has an extraordinary ability to see beneath the surface," she had told Catherine during their last parent-teacher conference. "His portraits don't just show what people look like, they show who they are. It's quite remarkable for someone his age." Catherine had felt a flush of pride, mixed with an odd sense of recognition. She remembered her own art teacher saying almost identical words about her work when she was George's age. The genetic echo was becoming impossible to ignore, and it extended into areas she had never expected. Even George's academic interests were aligning with Catherine's childhood passions. While William had always been drawn to history and military studies, George was showing a keen interest in psychology and human behavior. He would ask probing questions about why people acted certain ways, displaying an emotional intelligence that reminded Catherine of her own analytical nature as a child. "Mummy," George had said just the week before, "why do some people smile with their mouths, but not their eyes?" The question had stopped Catherine in her tracks. It was exactly the kind of observation she had made as a child, the sort of insight that had led her to study psychology at university. The physical resemblance was becoming so pronounced that strangers were beginning to notice. During their recent visit to a local farmer's market, several vendors had commented on how much George looked like his mother. One elderly woman had stopped them completely, studying George's face with frank amazement. "My goodness," she had said, "it's like looking at the princess as a boy. The resemblance is absolutely extraordinary." Catherine had smiled politely, but inside, her heart had been racing. The woman wasn't the first to make such an observation, and Catherine was beginning to realize that George's resemblance to her was becoming a topic of public interest. The royal protection officers had started mentioning it in their briefings. The young prince is drawing quite a bit of attention, Inspector Davies had noted during their weekly security meeting. People are stopping to stare more frequently, and we're hearing more comments about his resemblance to your Royal Highness. Catherine knew this attention would only intensify as George grew older. She had experienced firsthand how public fascination with royal appearances could become overwhelming, and the thought of George facing that scrutiny because of his resemblance to her filled her with protective anxiety. But there was something else, something deeper, that the growing resemblance was awakening in Catherine. Watching George develop her mannerisms, her expressions, her way of seeing the world, was like witnessing her own childhood through a different lens. It was beautiful and unsettling in equal measure. She found herself remembering moments from her own youth with startling clarity. The way she had felt overwhelmed by attention, the struggle to understand her place in the world, the gradual awakening of her sense of purpose. Would George experience the same journey? Would he feel the same pressures, the same need to find his authentic self amidst the expectations of others? The resemblance was also affecting her relationship with William in unexpected ways. That evening, as they prepared for bed, William had brought up what they were both thinking but hadn't yet discussed openly. "He's becoming more like you every day," William had said, watching George through their bedroom window as he played football in the garden below. "It's actually quite remarkable." Catherine had joined him at the window, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and concern as she watched their son. "I know," she had whispered. "I see myself in him more clearly every day. Sometimes it takes my breath away." William had wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "He's going to break hearts just like his mother did," he had said with a gentle laugh. But Catherine had heard the undertone of worry in his voice. They both knew that with great beauty came great attention, and with great attention came great responsibility. The conversation had awakened something in Catherine that she hadn't expected. She began to see her role as George's mother in a new light. She wasn't just raising a future king. She was raising a young man who would likely face many of the same challenges she had faced, magnified by his position in the royal family. That night, she had lain awake thinking about her own journey from a relatively normal childhood to becoming one of the most watched women in the world. She remembered the confusion, the self-doubt, the gradual building of confidence that had allowed her to find her place within the royal family. Would George need the same guidance? Would he benefit from her understanding of what it meant to be scrutinized for one's appearance and demeanor? The next morning brought a moment that crystallized everything Catherine had been feeling. George had been getting ready for school, standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, trying to tame his hair with a brush. Catherine had paused in the doorway, watching him, when he caught her eye in the reflection. For a moment, they had simply looked at each other through the mirror, mother and son, their faces so similar it was almost startling. George had smiled, that warm, genuine smile that was becoming more like Catherine's every day, and in that moment, Catherine felt a profound connection that went beyond genetics. "We look alike, don't we, Mummy?" George had said, not with vanity, but with simple curiosity. "We do, darling," Catherine had replied, stepping forward to help him with his tie. "But you're going to grow up to be even more handsome than I am beautiful." George had giggled at that, but as Catherine adjusted his collar, she made a silent promise. She would use her own experiences to help him navigate whatever challenges his appearance might bring. She would teach him that true beauty came from kindness, authenticity, and service to others, lessons she had learned through her own journey. The resemblance between Prince George and Princess Catherine was becoming undeniable, but Catherine was beginning to understand that it represented something far more significant than mere genetics. It was an opportunity, a chance to guide her son through experiences she understood intimately, to help him develop the confidence and grace that would serve him throughout his life. As George headed off to school that morning, Catherine watched him go with a heart full of love and purpose. The striking resemblance that was capturing royal attention was just the beginning of a much deeper story. One, a mother recognizing herself in her son and understanding that their similarity was not just a gift, but a responsibility that she was uniquely qualified to help him embrace. The autumn term at Lambert School brought new challenges and revelations for Prince George. As the weeks passed, his resemblance to Princess Catherine continued to evolve, but now it was accompanied by something unexpected, a growing awareness of the attention it was bringing him. The innocent boy who had simply asked his mother why she stared at him was beginning to understand that his appearance made him different, even among his royal siblings. It started during a photography session for the school yearbook. Mrs. Patterson, the school photographer, had been taking individual portraits of the children when she reached George. As she adjusted her camera settings, she paused, studying his face through her lens with an expression of amazement. "My goodness, Your Royal Highness," she had said, lowering her camera. "You have the most photogenic face I've ever had the pleasure to photograph. You're going to be quite the heartbreaker when you grow up." The comment had made George uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite understand. Several of his classmates had turned to look at him, and he felt their eyes studying his features with new interest. For the first time, George began to realize that his appearance was something others found remarkable, and the realization brought with it a weight he wasn't prepared to carry. That evening, he had approached Catherine with questions that revealed a maturity beyond his years. "Mummy, do people look at me differently because I look like you?" he had asked, settling beside her on the sofa in their sitting room. His blue eyes, so achingly similar to her own, held a seriousness that made Catherine's heart ache. Catherine had put down the book she was reading and given George her full attention. She could see that this wasn't a casual question born of childish curiosity. George was beginning to grapple with the reality of his position and appearance, and how she handled this conversation would shape his understanding of both. "Why do you ask, darling?" she had responded, choosing her words carefully. George had been quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about how to express his feelings. "Some of the boys at school were talking about how I look like you, and one of them said I was lucky because everyone thinks you're pretty. But it made me feel strange, like they were looking at me differently afterward." Catherine felt her heart break a little. George was experiencing something she remembered all too well. The moment when you realize that your appearance affects how others perceive and treat you. She had been a few years older when she first understood this, but George's royal status was accelerating his awareness of such dynamics. "Being noticed for how you look can feel overwhelming sometimes," Catherine had said, wrapping her arm around her son. "When I was young, I sometimes felt like people were more interested in my appearance than in who I was as a person. It can make you feel like you're in a fishbowl." George had nodded solemnly. "Is that why you always tell us that what's inside is more important than what's outside?" "Exactly," Catherine had replied, impressed by his understanding. "You are so much more than just a pretty face, George. You're kind, intelligent, funny, and thoughtful. Those are the qualities that truly matter, even if they're not the first things people notice." But even as Catherine offered comfort and wisdom to her son, she was struggling with her own complex emotions about his resemblance to her. Watching George navigate these early experiences of appearance-based attention was bringing back memories she had long buried. She remembered the first time someone had photographed her because of her looks rather than her accomplishments, the strange mixture of pride and discomfort that had accompanied such moments. The resemblance was also beginning to affect George's relationship with his siblings in subtle ways. Charlotte, now 8 and incredibly perceptive, had started making observations that revealed her awareness of her brother's growing similarity to their mother. "George has Mummy's serious face," she had announced during dinner one evening, mimicking an expression that was indeed identical on both George and Catherine. "He makes the same face when he's thinking hard about something." Louis, still young enough to be unfiltered in his observations, had added his own commentary. "George looks like Mummy when she's on television," he had said matter-of-factly. "They have the same smile that makes people happy." William had caught Catherine's eye across the dinner table, and she could see that he too was beginning to understand the full implications of George's resemblance to her. It wasn't just about genetics anymore. It was about the burden and blessing of carrying a face that would inevitably draw attention and expectation. Later that week, the family had attended a local charity event, a small, informal gathering that was meant to be low-key and relaxed. But even in this casual setting, Catherine noticed how people's eyes were drawn to George in a way that was different from the usual curiosity about the royal children. Several attendees had approached them specifically to comment on the resemblance, and Catherine watched George's body language shift as the evening progressed. At the beginning of the event, he had been his usual confident, engaging self. But as more people made remarks about his looks and his similarity to Catherine, she noticed him becoming more reserved, more careful about his expressions and gestures. It was heartbreaking to watch her son begin to monitor himself in response to others' attention. The breaking point came when a well-meaning elderly gentleman had taken George's hand and said, "Young man, you're going to be just as beautiful as your mother when you grow up. The cameras are going to love you." George had smiled politely, but Catherine had seen the flash of something, discomfort, confusion, perhaps even resentment, cross his features. On the drive home, George had been unusually quiet. When Catherine asked if he had enjoyed the event, he had shrugged non-committally. "It was okay," he had said, "but I wish people would stop talking about how I look." That night, Catherine had found herself in William's study, sharing her concerns about how George was handling the attention his appearance was generating. "I'm worried we're seeing the beginning of something that could really affect him," she had said, pacing in front of William's desk. "He's starting to become self-conscious about his looks in a way that isn't healthy for a 10-year-old. William had listened carefully before responding. "I've been thinking the same thing," he had admitted. "He's always been confident and natural, but lately I've noticed him checking his reflection more often, adjusting his hair, even asking if his clothes look right. That's not normal behavior for George." They had talked late into the night about how to help George navigate this new reality. Catherine shared her own experiences of learning to manage public attention, while William offered insights from his own childhood of being scrutinized as a royal child. Together, they began to develop strategies to help George maintain his sense of self while acknowledging the reality of the attention he would likely continue to receive. The next morning, Catherine had a heart-to-heart conversation with George that would prove to be pivotal in his developing understanding of his unique situation. She had found him in the garden, sitting on the swing set that William had installed when they moved to Adelaide Cottage, staring thoughtfully at the trees. "You seemed a bit overwhelmed last night," Catherine had said, settling on the swing beside him. George had looked at her with those increasingly familiar eyes, her eyes, and Catherine could see the internal struggle he was experiencing. "Mummy, do you ever wish you looked different?" he had asked. The question hit Catherine with unexpected force. It was such a profound question from someone so young, revealing depths of thought that both impressed and worried her. "Sometimes," she had answered honestly, "there have been times when I've wondered if people would listen to what I have to say more carefully if they weren't distracted by how I look." Really, George had seemed surprised that his mother, who appeared so confident and comfortable with herself, could harbor such doubts. "Really," Catherine had confirmed. "But I've learned something important over the years. We can't control how we look or how others react to our appearance, but we can control how we use whatever gifts we've been given. If people notice you because you're handsome, that gives you an opportunity to show them the wonderful person you are inside." George had been quiet for a long moment, clearly processing this advice. But what if they only care about the outside part? Then they're not the kind of people whose opinions matter, Catherine had said firmly. The people who truly matter will see your kindness, your intelligence, your humor, and all the things that make you special beyond your looks. This conversation marked a turning point in George's understanding of his situation. Over the following weeks, Catherine watched him begin to develop strategies for handling attention that showed remarkable emotional intelligence for his age. He learned to deflect appearance-based compliments by redirecting conversations toward his interests and activities. When someone commented on his looks, he might respond by talking about his latest photography project or his progress in football. But the resemblance between mother and son continued to deepen in ways that went beyond physical appearance. Catherine began to notice that George was developing her same approach to royal duties, a natural warmth and genuine interest in people that couldn't be taught or faked. During a visit to a local children's hospital, she watched him interact with young patients with the same intuitive empathy that had become her trademark. "He has your gift for connecting with people," one of the nurses had told Catherine afterward. "You can see that the children felt genuinely comfortable with him, not just impressed by his status. That's a rare quality." Catherine had felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with George's appearance. This was something deeper, more meaningful than genetic resemblance. This was character, and it was emerging in George in ways that reminded her of her own journey toward understanding her role and purpose. The autumn term ended with a school play in which George had a leading role. As Catherine sat in the audience watching her son perform, she was struck not by his resemblance to her, but by his emergence as his own person. Yes, he carried her features and some of her mannerisms, but he was using them to express his own unique personality and talents. After the performance, several parents approached Catherine to compliment George's acting ability. For the first time in months, the focus was on something George had accomplished rather than something he simply possessed by virtue of genetics. Catherine saw George's face light up with genuine pride, and she realized that he was beginning to understand the difference between being noticed for how he looked and being recognized for what he did. That night, as Catherine tucked George into bed, he had made an observation that showed how much he had grown over the term. "Mummy, I think I understand now why you're always telling us to use our gifts to help others. If people are going to notice me anyway, I might as well make sure they see something good." Catherine had kissed his forehead, her heart swelling with love and pride. George was learning to embrace his inheritance, both genetic and positional, while maintaining his own sense of identity. The resemblance that had once seemed like a burden was becoming a tool he could use to make a positive impact on others. The winter months brought an unexpected development in the ongoing story of Prince George's remarkable resemblance to his mother. What had begun as a family curiosity and gradually become a topic of public interest was now attracting the attention of international media. The transformation was complete enough that even seasoned royal watchers were amazed by the genetic mirror that seemed to exist between mother and son. The shift began when professional photographs from the family's Christmas card session were released to the public. The images, taken by a renowned royal photographer, captured the family in an intimate, natural setting. But it was one particular photograph that sent social media and traditional press into a frenzy. In the image, Catherine and George were seated together, both looking slightly away from the camera with identical expressions of gentle contemplation. The similarity was so striking that many initially thought the photographer had somehow used digital effects to achieve the resemblance. "I've been photographing the royal family for over 20 years, the photographer, Marcus Whitfield, told his assistant after reviewing the images. "I've never seen a genetic resemblance quite like this. It's not just the features, it's the way they carry themselves, their expressions, even the way they tilt their heads. It's absolutely extraordinary." The photograph quickly became one of the most shared royal images of the year. Social media platforms were flooded with side-by-side comparisons of Catherine at George's age and current photos of the young prince. The hashtag Royal Doppelgangers began trending worldwide, with thousands of people marveling at the uncanny resemblance. For Catherine, the overwhelming public response brought mixed emotions. She felt proud that people found her son beautiful, but she was also concerned about the level of attention his appearance was generating. She remembered all too well how intense media focus could feel overwhelming, especially for a child who was still developing his sense of self. The attention reached a crescendo when several international magazines began reaching out to Kensington Palace requesting exclusive interviews about the resemblance. Fashion magazines wanted to explore the genetic magic of the Wales family. Psychology publications were interested in discussing the implications of such strong physical similarity between parent and child. Even scientific journals were curious about the rare occurrence of such pronounced inherited traits. The requests are becoming impossible to manage, Catherine's private secretary, Emily Richardson, reported during their weekly briefing. We have over 30 interview requests specifically about Prince George's resemblance to Your Royal Highness. Several are offering substantial donations to charity in exchange for access. Catherine found herself in a delicate position. While she appreciated the charitable offers, she was protective of George's privacy and concerned about turning his natural development into a media spectacle. George is 11 years old, she told her team firmly. He didn't choose to be born looking like me, and he shouldn't have to become a subject of scientific or media fascination because of it. But the attention wasn't just coming from the media. Child psychologists began discussing the potential impact of such a strong resemblance on George's identity development. Dr. Sarah Chun, a prominent developmental psychologist, published an article examining how children handle being frequently compared to a famous parent. When a child bears such a strong physical resemblance to a well-known parent, it can create unique psychological challenges, Dr. Chen wrote. The child may struggle to develop an independent sense of identity, feeling as though they are living in their parent's shadow. Conversely, they might benefit from enhanced confidence and social advantages. The key is how the family and public handle the situation. Catherine read the article with growing concern. Was the attention George was receiving healthy for his development? Was she handling the situation correctly? She found herself second-guessing decisions she had previously felt confident about. The turning point came during a visit to a children's charity that Catherine had been supporting for several years. The visit was meant to be routine, with both Catherine and George participating in activities with the children. However, the media coverage that followed focused almost entirely on George's appearance and his resemblance to his mother, rather than on the important work the charity was doing. Royal heir's stunning resemblance to mother steals the spotlight, read one headline. Prince George, the mini-me future king, proclaimed another. Very few articles mentioned the charity's mission or the children they had met. That evening, George approached Catherine with a maturity that both impressed and saddened her. "Mummy, I think I'm becoming a distraction," he said, his blue eyes serious and thoughtful. Today was supposed to be about helping those children, but everyone kept talking about how I look instead. Catherine felt her heart break. Her 11-year-old son was recognizing that his appearance was overshadowing his actions and intentions. It was a realization that showed remarkable emotional intelligence, but it was also a burden no child should have to carry. "You're not a distraction, sweetheart," Catherine assured him. "You're growing into a wonderful young man who cares about helping others. That's what truly matters." But George wasn't finished. "I've been thinking about what you told me about using gifts to help people. Maybe my gift isn't just looking like you. Maybe it's being able to get people's attention so I could direct it toward important things." The insight took Catherine's breath away. George was developing a sophisticated understanding of his position and the opportunities it provided. Rather than being overwhelmed by the attention his appearance generated, he was beginning to see how he might use it constructively. This conversation sparked a new approach within the Wales household. Catherine and William decided to work with George to help him understand how to leverage the attention his resemblance brought while maintaining his authenticity and protecting his childhood. They brought in Dr. Margaret Foster, a child psychologist who specialized in helping young people in unusual circumstances. "George is handling this attention with remarkable grace," Dr. Foster observed after her first session with him. "He's developing healthy coping mechanisms and showing signs of turning potential challenges into opportunities. However, it's crucial that he maintains connections to normal childhood experiences and relationships." The recommendation led to some important changes in how the family managed George's public appearances. Rather than trying to downplay his resemblance to Catherine, they decided to acknowledge it while ensuring that his actions and character remained the focus. George began participating in more hands-on charity work, where his natural empathy and kindness could be the center of attention rather than his appearance. During a visit to an elderly care facility, George spent hours playing chess with residents, listening to their stories, and helping serve afternoon tea. The media coverage that followed still mentioned his resemblance to Catherine, but the focus had shifted to his character and actions. Prince George's compassion shines during care home visit, read the headlines. Catherine watched with growing pride as George learned to navigate the attention with increasing confidence. He developed a natural way of acknowledging comments about his appearance while redirecting conversations toward more substantial topics. When an elderly woman at the care facility told him he was as beautiful as his mother, George had smiled warmly and replied, "Thank you, but I'd rather be known for being as kind as she is." The response had been captured by photographers and became one of the most widely quoted royal moments of the year. It showed George's emerging understanding of how to handle his unique situation with grace and wisdom. As winter progressed, the resemblance between Catherine and George continued to evolve, but now was accompanied by something even more remarkable: George's developing sense of purpose and identity. He was learning to see his similarity to his mother not as a burden or a curiosity, but as a platform for positive impact. The transformation in George's approach became evident during a school presentation about environmental conservation. When parents and teachers commented on his poise and natural presence during the presentation, George had responded by discussing the importance of protecting the planet for future generations. He was learning to use the attention his appearance generated as a way to amplify messages he cared about. Catherine found herself learning as much from George as she was teaching him. Watching her son navigate the challenges of inherited physical traits with such maturity and grace was giving her new insights into her own journey and purpose. She began to see their resemblance not as a genetic coincidence, but as an opportunity for them to support each other in their shared experience of being highly visible public figures. The winter months also brought a special project that would deepen the bond between Catherine and George while giving him a new way to channel the attention his appearance generated. They decided to collaborate on a photography exhibition featuring portraits of unsung heroes in their community: healthcare workers, teachers, volunteers, and everyday people making extraordinary contributions. Working together behind the camera, Catherine and George discovered that their resemblance extended to their artistic vision. They had similar instincts for capturing authentic moments and revealing the character of their subjects. The project gave George a way to be noticed for his skills and perspective rather than just his genetics. The exhibition represents something beautiful about legacy and inheritance, observed art critic James Pemberton. We see not just physical resemblance between mother and son, but a shared sensibility, a similar way of seeing and representing the world. It's artistic DNA in action. As the winter drew to a close, George had transformed from a boy overwhelmed by attention about his appearance into a young man, beginning to understand how to use his gifts, both inherited and developed, to make a positive impact. The resemblance to his mother that had once seemed like a burden was becoming a powerful tool for connection and influence. Catherine watched this transformation with a heart full of pride and amazement. Her son was not just growing into her physical features. He was developing his own character while drawing on the best aspects of what he had inherited from her. The striking resemblance that had captured royal attention was evolving into something much more meaningful, a shared commitment to service, empathy, and using their platform to help others. The journey was far from over, but George had shown that he possessed not just Catherine's appearance, but also her strength, wisdom, and dedication to making the world a better place. The resemblance between them was becoming less about genetics and more about character, purpose, and the special bond between a mother and son who understood the unique responsibilities that came with their position in the world. Spring arrived at Adelaide Cottage with a sense of renewal and transformation that seemed to mirror the journey Prince George had been on over the past year. As the gardens bloomed and new life emerged all around them, Catherine found herself marveling at how much her eldest son had grown, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. The striking resemblance that had initially captured royal attention had evolved into something far more profound and meaningful. The change was evident in everything George did. Where once he had seemed overwhelmed by comments about his appearance, he now carried himself with a quiet confidence that reminded Catherine of her own evolution as a public figure. But this wasn't just inherited poise. George had developed his own authentic presence that honored his resemblance to his mother while establishing his unique identity. The transformation became particularly apparent during a major royal event, the annual Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. It was George's first time participating in such a formal ceremony, and Catherine had been concerned about how he would handle the intense media attention and scrutiny. The event would be broadcast internationally, and she knew that comparisons between them would be inevitable. As the family prepared to leave for the service, Catherine noticed George standing before the mirror in the entrance hall, not with the self-consciousness she might have expected, but with a calm, thoughtful expression. He was wearing his first formal morning coat, and the resemblance between them was more striking than ever. But what impressed Catherine most was his demeanor. He seemed centered and purposeful rather than nervous or self-aware. "You look very handsome, darling," Catherine told him, adjusting his tie with maternal pride. "Thank you, Mummy," George replied, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "But today isn't about how we look, is it? It's about representing our family and showing respect for the Commonwealth nations." His response took Catherine's breath away. In that moment, she realized that George had internalized the most important lesson she had hoped to teach him. That appearance was simply a tool, and what truly mattered was how you use your platform to serve others. The service proceeded beautifully, with George conducting himself with a maturity and grace that exceeded everyone's expectations. During the reception afterward, Catherine watched him interact with Commonwealth representatives, dignitaries, and young people from various nations. He listened attentively to their stories, asked thoughtful questions, and showed genuine interest in their experiences and perspectives. The media coverage that followed was unlike anything Catherine had seen before regarding George. While his resemblance to her was still mentioned, it was no longer the primary focus. Instead, headlines praised his poise, his genuine engagement with people, and his natural diplomatic instincts. Prince George shows remarkable maturity at Commonwealth service, read the lead story in several major publications. But perhaps more importantly, George seemed genuinely energized by the experience. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, he spoke enthusiastically about the people he had met and the projects they had described to him. "Did you know that a 12-year-old girl in Kenya has developed a way to purify water using local materials?" he asked excitedly. "And there's a boy in Australia who's created an app to help other young people with anxiety. It makes me want to do something important too." Catherine and William exchanged a meaningful look across the dinner table. George wasn't just handling his position well. He was being inspired by it. The attention his resemblance to Catherine generated had become a gateway to meaningful connections and a growing sense of purpose. This sense of purpose crystallized into action when George proposed an ambitious project for his 12th birthday. Instead of a traditional party, he wanted to organize a charity event that would bring together young people from different backgrounds to work on community service projects. He called it Bridges, explaining that he wanted to help build connections between people who might not otherwise meet. "I've been thinking about what you've taught me about using our gifts to help others," George told Catherine as they discussed his idea. "My gift might be that people pay attention to me because I look like you." So maybe I can use that attention to highlight the amazing things other young people are doing. Catherine felt her eyes fill with tears. Her son wasn't just accepting his resemblance to her. He was transforming it into something beautiful and purposeful. The genetic lottery that had given him her features was becoming a platform for positive change. The planning for Bridges became a family affair, with Charlotte and Louis contributing ideas and William helping to coordinate with various charities and organizations. But George remained the driving force behind the project, showing organizational skills and emotional intelligence that amazed everyone involved. His vision for bringing together diverse groups of young people is quite sophisticated. Observe Sarah Matthews, the event coordinator they brought in to help. He's not just thinking about the immediate impact of his service projects. He's considering how to create lasting connections and understanding between participants from different communities. As the event approached, George's excitement was infectious. He had personally reached out to several of the young people he had met during royal engagements, inviting them to participate. His natural ability to connect with others, a trait he had inherited from Catherine, but made uniquely his own, was proving to be just as valuable as his striking appearance. The day of the Bridges event dawned bright and clear, and Catherine felt a mixture of pride and nervousness as she watched George take on a leadership role unlike any he had experienced before. The event was being held at a community center in East London, and young people from various backgrounds, including refugees, students from inner-city schools, rural communities, and private institutions, had gathered to work together on projects ranging from urban gardening to digital literacy training for elderly residents. What struck Catherine most powerfully was how George had positioned himself in the event. Rather than being the center of attention, he had designed it so that other young people's achievements and ideas would be highlighted. He moved from group to group, encouraging participants, facilitating introductions, and ensuring that everyone felt included and valued. He has an extraordinary gift for making people feel comfortable and included. Observed Dr. James Morrison, a youth development specialist who was documenting the event. It's not just charisma. It's genuine empathy combined with natural leadership instincts. He's creating an environment where other young people can shine. The media coverage of the event marked another milestone in George's journey. For the first time, articles about him barely mentioned his resemblance to Catherine. Instead, they focused entirely on his initiative, his leadership skills, and the positive impact of the event. Prince George's Bridges initiative brings together diverse youth communities, read the headlines. But the most meaningful moment came during the event's closing ceremony. George had asked several participants to share their experiences, and one young refugee named Amara spoke about how the day had given her hope and new friendships. As she finished speaking, she turned to George and said, "Thank you for seeing us as people with stories and dreams, not just as charity cases. You've shown us that we all have something valuable to contribute." Catherine watched George's face as he listened to Amara's words, and she saw in his expression the same deep satisfaction she felt when her own charitable work made a real difference in someone's life. The resemblance between them in that moment was profound, but it had nothing to do with physical features. It was about shared values, shared purpose, and a shared commitment to using their platform to uplift others. In the months that followed, Bridges evolved from a one-time event into an ongoing initiative. George continued to meet with many of the participants, supporting their individual projects and helping to facilitate ongoing collaborations between the diverse groups that had come together. His natural gift for relationship building, another trait he had inherited from Catherine, was proving to be just as valuable as any physical resemblance. The success of Bridges also brought unexpected opportunities. Several international youth organizations reached out to George, inviting him to participate in global initiatives. Universities began expressing early interest in his future academic pursuits. Publishers approached the family about the possibility of George writing a book about his experiences and insights as a young royal. But perhaps most importantly, George was developing a sophisticated understanding of his unique position and how to use it effectively. During a quiet conversation with Catherine one evening, he articulated insights that showed remarkable maturity for his age. "I used to feel like looking like you was something that happened to me," he told her as they walked through the gardens at Adelaide Cottage. "Now I realize it's a tool I can choose how to use. People might notice me because of genetics, but what they remember will be up to me." Catherine felt a profound sense of accomplishment as she listened to her son. The journey from initial concern about his resemblance to her had led to this moment of clarity and purpose. George had not only accepted his inheritance, he had transformed it into something uniquely his own. As summer arrived and George prepared to transition to a new phase of his education, Catherine reflected on everything that had transpired over the past year. The striking resemblance that had initially captured royal attention had become the foundation for something far more significant. George had learned to see his appearance not as a burden or even as a gift, but as a responsibility to represent his family and his country with dignity, to use his platform to help others, and to remain true to his own values and character. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. George had evolved from a boy overwhelmed by attention about his looks to a young man who understood how to leverage that attention for positive impact. He had learned to honor his resemblance to his mother while establishing his own identity and purpose. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the entire journey was how it had deepened the bond between Catherine and George. Their physical resemblance had led to a recognition of deeper similarities, their shared empathy, their commitment to service, their natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. These were the traits that would serve George throughout his life, long after the novelty of his appearance had faded. As Catherine watched George interact with his siblings, work on his various projects, and navigate the complexities of his position with increasing confidence and grace, she felt a deep sense of peace. The striking resemblance that had once worried her was now a source of shared strength and purpose. Together, they had transformed a genetic coincidence into a powerful force for good. The story of Prince George's resemblance to Princess Catherine had captured royal attention, but its true significance lay in what it had taught both of them about identity, purpose, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. George had learned that true beauty lies not in physical features, but in character and actions. Catherine had discovered that the greatest gift she could give her son was not her appearance, but her values and her example of how to use one's gifts in service of others. As they looked toward the future, both mother and son understood that their resemblance was just the beginning of their story together. The real legacy they were building had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with the positive impact they could make on the world by working together, supporting each other, and never forgetting that their greatest privilege was the opportunity to serve others.